as the 3 bench pieces, we got Leury, Sheets, and Hamilton is what you told me before the show. What kind of... Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, so like, what are the options really there outside of, on those last 11 spots where Leury, Sheets, and Hamilton are?
I think Sheets makes the team because what you're really looking at here, you've got a bunch of guys that can play several positions, and that's a good thing. That versatility is good, and so I think when it comes to manning some of these spots, I want to look at it this way: Sheets is probably going to make the team, but he's going to do so because he provides lefty power. And so whether that's off the bench or starting every once in a while at DH, right field, first base to spell Andrew Vaughn, whatever it might be, he's there to hit the ball very far as a left-handed hitter. The other 2 spots then are you need an outfielder to play defense, because even though Sheets might be a fourth outfielder, I don't think he's there to be an outfielder.
Right.
And so I think you need somebody to go and have defensive ability at all 3 outfield positions.
Well, with the whole Vaughn stuff that we're seeing with his back, does Sheets kind of gain more importance with his first base flexibility? Because we've seen the Colas discussion, and we keep wondering, like, well, they're both lefties. They both really can't hit well against lefties, and, they're both going to see righties about the same. Like, it's going to be tough to platoon those 2 players. Do we see a little bit more of a platoon at first base to spell Andrew Vaughn?
I mean, if needed, sure. I mean, Jose Abreu is the only guy that's going to go out and play 160 games, right? So I think that you shouldn't expect the White Sox, anybody on the White Sox, to log that kind of time. And so you're going to need to plug people in when these guys get days off. There's just going to be, one day Andrew Vaughn, whether he's 100% healthy or not, is just going to get a day off because he's played a ton of games in a row and he's just going to get a day off. Someone's going to need to play first base. It might be Yasmani Grandal. It might be, it might be Gavin Sheets. So you just need somebody to do that. Gavin Sheets can fill in there. He can fill in at DH. He can fill in right field. And that's fine. Also, he can come off the bench. If Pedro Grifol is going to be this matchup guy that he keeps talking about being, right, there's going to be matchups in games, late in games, where it's the 8th inning, the White Sox are down a run or 2, and there's a guy on the mound who's going to own Andrew Vaughn, right? But Gavin Sheets might be a better matchup. So why don't you go ahead and pinch hit? And that doesn't just apply to Vaughn. It applies to anybody on the team because then you move guys around. But, to have lefty power off the bench is a big deal, and I think Gavin Sheets is going to make the team for that reason. But my point was that he might be a 4th outfielder, but he's not a 4th outfielder with a capital F and a capital O, right? He's because he can't play center field. He can't spell Luis Robert Jr. in center field. And he's probably not going to play much, if any, left field either. So you need a guy to do that, to play the defensive end, and I think that's where Billy Hamilton comes in. He seems to be getting a ton of playing time in Cactus League, and he's just really fast. He does something that not everybody who would be in that mix, whether it's Victor Reyes or Jake Marisnik, he does something that those guys can't do, and that's have an elite base running ability. So he's very valuable if you put him on the roster, not just because he can spell any of those guys in the outfield, but because you can stick him on second base in a tie game in the 9th inning and win because he can get home better than anybody else can, right? So that leaves the backup infielder, your 5th infielder. And I really think it comes down to Leury García and Hanser Alberto. I'll mention Romy Gonzalez just because when we were talking about this earlier, you said, well, what about Romy Gonzalez? Romy Gonzalez,
who was referenced Ben Zobrist like.
Well, in terms of the position they wanted him to play.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. I think they want to turn him into, long-term, a guy that can be plugged in everywhere, which Leury García is now, and to a lesser degree, Hanser Alberto is now as well. Those guys are veteran players. They've done this for a long time. Romy Gonzalez has very little major league experience. Romy Gonzalez can also go back down to AAA. Right. Neither of these other 2 guys can. Hanser Alberto has earned a spot on this team, not just because he's been amazing in Cactus League. Of course, Cactus League is, as we know, practice. And Pedro Grifol told me before I left Arizona that stats are the last thing they're going to look at when determining whether somebody has had a good spring or a bad spring, for that matter. But Alberto's been getting rave reviews from Pedro since camp started because he coached him in Kansas City. He knows the kind of guy that he is in the clubhouse, and that seems to me to be the thing that wins the day for Hanser Alberto if he does make this team over Leury García. That's not to say Leury García is a bad teammate. I think he's a very positive clubhouse presence as well. It's just when you've got a manager banging the table for a guy, it says something, I think. Leury García, when we brought him up to Pedro early in camp, kind of said like, oh, well, you know, he's got to compete for a spot, which is not something you would expect to hear from a guy who's on a 3-year contract, a guy who's the longest tenured player on the team, and a guy who basically from every manager prior has been lauded endlessly for what he provides to a roster. Now, I'm not saying that Pedro doesn't agree with those assessments, but it sure seems to me that, you know, think about what Pedro said about how he advocated for Andrew Benintendi, a guy who he had in Kansas City, right? He said some very glowing things about Billy Hamilton, a guy that he had in Kansas City. Does familiarity, does a year playing for a Pedro Grifol team in Kansas City, you know, do it for Hanser Alberto? Does it make him the guy to be this backup infielder, along with all the great success, obviously, that he has had so far this spring in Arizona? So I don't know if today I can sit here and tell you that, oh, that's it, Leury's done. That's the end of Leury legend here on the South Side, because there are things they have to weigh, and certainly an $11 million financial commitment is one of those things. But it would seem to me that we've heard a lot more good things about Hanser Alberto from one of the guys who's going to be making this decision in Pedro Grifol than we have good things about Leury García.
Well, and I think the one thing that has changed clearly is Tony La Russa is not on the bench anymore. And we saw when Tony La Russa left on August 30th that Leury's playing time drastically decreased, and he was a little bit banged up.
He was a lot banged up.
But even then, he was still being played all throughout August when he was his most banged up. I feel like September, he probably got more time off. He was probably a little bit fresher. In the first 129 games, 72 starts. In the last 32, 4. And I don't know if it's losing favor. I don't know if it's all health. I don't know if it's a little bit of both. But I do wonder what not having Tony La Russa, who seemed to be a huge advocate for Leury García, not just seeing him as a role player. He was a starter, but he could play multiple different positions. I think having that support, you know, is showing a little bit. Leury has to win it. And I know that, you know, you bring up stats, and it is Cactus League stats. And I know stats can be controversial, but sometimes the better player has better stats because they're better. And I think Hanser Alberto has shown that against lefties, he can do near league average damage. Like, he can be an average hitter against lefties. Leury García really can't do that. He doesn't really play defense well. There's a lot of different positions, but he doesn't play any of those spots like decently.
I think he's a pretty good shortstop. I think he's a pretty good shortstop.
He's got a good arm. But even then, like Billy Hamilton, like Hamilton's a great defender. And that's the thing, is like you're getting a great defender and great base running. Alberto will give you position flexibility, a good bat versus lefties, and, you know, Leury will give you position flexibility as well. But I mean, maybe speed.
Well, this is my thing when it comes to the outfield, is that in the last 2-3 years, Adam Engel was no doubt going to be that fourth outfielder because he was really good on defense, and the White Sox their starters weren't good at defense, with the exception of the year when Luis Robert won a Gold Glove. This year, the one big thing that they did accomplish this year was really boosting the defensive ability in the outfield. Luis Robert is Luis Robert, but to put Benintendi in left, a Gold Glover himself, and Oscar Colas in right, who comes with a great defensive reputation.
And great reviews from Terrell Boston,
of course. But that's suddenly they go from a defensive outfield where two of the spots are guys who are playing out of position to that's a good defensive outfield, and so it doesn't necessarily. They don't need that guy to come in every night in the 8th inning and replace Eloy Jimenez. You know what I mean? They don't need Adam Engel to come in every night and replace Andrew Vaughn. So if your starting 3 outfielders are expected to go 9 innings in every game they play, Billy Hamilton being really good at one thing suddenly becomes more valuable necessarily than, oh man, we need a guy who's going to be able to succeed when given a lot of playing time. This isn't, you know, Eloy's taken out in the 7th and Billy Hamilton goes in there and he's got to have an at bat. Mm-hmm. This is put Billy Hamilton in the top of the 9th or the bottom of the 9th to run for you. Right. And yeah, he's going to give time off to the guys that are usual outfielders, right? But so are other guys, like Colas needs a day off. Well, put Sheets in there, and then you're confident sending Sheets up to the plate for 3 or 4 at-bats in a game where you might not be confident doing that with Hamilton. So I think that his ability to do something that none of the other guys can outweighs, like, if it, Jake Marisnick wins the job, for example, you're like, okay, well, I'm more confident maybe in him taking 3 at-bats once every week, or something, 4 at-bats once a week. But the White Sox don't need their guys to do that very often. Right. So,
I agree, because it's like I don't really know what Marisnick and, like, because I think Hamilton plays better defense and speed, and has more speed than Reyes or Marisnick. Like, right. Reyes probably might give you the best at-bats, but I feel like Reyes needs that consistency to even really show the potential of the bat. Like, you're just kind of leaving them in case of pinch hit, where it seems like Sheets can do that. It seems like versus lefties, Hanser Alberto can possibly do that. I think it's interesting. And too, you bring up Adam Engel, the most famous game where we last saw Adam Engel basically coming in for Andrew Vaughn for a defensive sub and dropping that ball against the Orioles. But
and that's a shame that's going to be his legacy with this team, because he had that one week where he robbed like 4 homers in 1 week. So that's a shame, because he was a great defender out there. But that was just a moment in a season gone wrong that was really one of the most defining images, we'll say, if not a defining moment, a defining image.
Well, and then, all-star Liam Hendricks gets taken deep by Kyle Stowers, who's a rookie. So just weird things happening in that game as well. Luis Robert not able to swing a bat, just odd circumstance. Not all on Adam Engel, but hopefully Hamilton, who's kind of a little bit less worried about making the team, less worried about trying to find his hitting. Like, if Billy Hamilton comes up here, steals bases, and plays defense, he's doing his job. Like, Billy Hamilton doesn't need to be Billy the hitter. That was just, kind of, cherry on top in 2021.
That would be my opinion. You know what I mean? Like, I obviously might not see what the White Sox front office is looking for necessarily, but my opinion would be, you put Billy Hamilton on this team because you're trying to win a World Series. You need to win as many games as possible, and you need every element at your disposal to do that. And for a team that struggled so much at running the bases last year, for a team that struggled so much at playing defense last year, you would think you would value some of those things in trying to win you games in the smallest of margins, the game of inches, that kind of thing. You think you would value that. So I'm not trying to disrespect Victor Reyes or Jake Marisnick, who you put them on the team, and maybe they're a bench player that contributes very well. But I see someone with an elite attribute in Billy Hamilton, and I would think that would be well valued.
He's got a thing.